a Playlyst original.
Welcome to the Pilot Podcast,
where we review the pilot episodes of TV shows to answer your question, should I watch this?
My name is BJ.
And my name is Mitu.
And this week, we're watching The Gentleman on Netflix, Elsbeth on CBS, The Completely Made-Up Adventures of Dick Turpin on Apple TV+, and Shogun on FX.
So stay tuned to the end to find out any interesting properties BJ's inherited.
I wish it was an estate, but we'll get into it later. Before that, how about you tell us what happens on The Gentleman?
Created by Guy Ritchie and inspired by his film of the same name, this Netflix series follows aristocratic Eddie, played by Theo James, who inherits the family estate and discovers that it's home to an enormous weed empire whose proprietors aren't going anywhere.
So me too. Very quickly, we're introduced to enormous wealth, an enormous estate and farm, an enormous weed business, enormous debt. This was a lot.
This was a lot. I know that often our critique for pilot episodes that are over an hour is, what did you do with that hour? Why don't we know information, motivations, different characters, different things going on? In this one, I would say maybe they overcorrected that issue where I felt oddly tired after I watched it. Not that it wasn't fun, but it was just a lot. We have the family drama. This inheritance skipped Eddie's older brother, Freddie, played by Daniel Ings, who has a drug issue. This is like classic rich show thing where the oldest son is kind of not living up to whatever the parent standards are and thus doesn't get to be the person who inherits the estate and all the power. There's the groundskeeper with all the secrets, Vinny, played by Jeff Seacombe. And then we learn about the other side of the property, which is the drug business and the crime. And Susie, who runs it, played by Kaya Scodelario, who is kind of running Eddie right now.
Yeah, there's a literal underground business on this estate. And a good question you brought up is, why is Eddie trying to hold this all together? Because he is suddenly brought home, suddenly takes on the title of Duke and all that is attached to that. And even though his father on his dying bed said, take care of your older brother, I didn't realize he would go this far to take care of him.
Yes, the older brother got them in a lot of messes, and Eddie is just jumping in to clean it up. But it's also clear that he was the spare and not the heir, and thus had established his own life. He was in the military, he was doing his own thing, living his life like he's golden, and he has to come back to be at this will reading, to be with his father as his father passes. And it is odd that he jumps right in when it's clear that he hasn't spent much time at home. He just was unfamiliar with everything going on. He didn't know how deep the mess was that his brother was in. He didn't seem to have a strong familiarity with his family. And he obviously was unfamiliar with the whole drug under business just taking place right there on the property.
But he accepted all of it. He is comfortable asking Susie for help throughout the episode.
Follows her immediately, just trusts her immediately.
And some very, let's just say, messed up crime-related stuff happened right in front of his eyes. And he says, okay, we're getting closer to my goal of helping my brother.
Very weird, when it would have been helpful in the show to maybe show us in some way, be it through flashbacks or even through present time dialogue, what this bond is he feels with his brother, that he had with his father, or even with this property that would motivate such action.
And this isn't a question, but I thought it was very odd how he was so easy to go back into his life of being very wealthy, because the opening makes it appear that he gave up all that access to money. And once he gets it, he has his butler serving him tea. He has people escorting his sister out. He dives right back into being a duke.
He said being rich is like riding a bike. You just got to get right back up on that horse.
Easy peasy.
He said, I actually really like this.
Maybe that's the motivation.
Maybe that is the motivation. Maybe because he thought he was the spare, he was like, well, may as well set out on my own. But as soon as he found out everything was his, he was like, actually, that's Duke Eddie to you. And go ahead and fetch me my black tea. Thank you.
This is a great house, so I will live here.
And I will do anything to keep it. And I mean anything.
So me too. After seeing everything he's willing to do, and even hints of what he might have to do next, will you watch more episodes of The Gentleman on Netflix?
I see why people are enjoying this show. For me, a few too many plot lines were happening. And the bigger issue was the violence. It was so violent. We didn't quite get into that during our review. But for my fellow babies, this one's very bloody. And I think for me, when a show is this violent, I have to really be into the plot to be able to comfortably fast forward those scenes. And I didn't fully understand character motivations in order to get into this show and look past the violence. So I think this is my stop.
I think this is a reasonable place to stop. I will keep watching while cooking. I'll be a little distracted. I am curious to see more of this Eddie-Susie relationship. Honestly, not that excited about where Freddie, the brother, is going, but there's still some plot lines that I want to follow through.
All right.
So how about we go to a show that still has some mysteries left to one that tells us the answer from the start.
You're talking about Elsbeth on CBS. Astute but unconventional attorney Elsbeth, played by Carrie Preston, utilizes her singular point of view to make unique observations and corner brilliant criminals alongside the NYPD.
So as our resident procedural mystery lover, have you ever seen a lead who is an attorney that's not a consultant but still working with detectives?
This definitely feels like a post-2020 take on a procedural because she's a police observer. She said that she was a defense attorney, but she didn't like defending people who did the crime or that she could tell did the crime. So she wanted to be able to tell the truth, and she wanted to be able to pursue justice, and thus took on this role of being an observer for the NYPD. And I thought it was an interesting angle. I liked her dynamic with the police. We have Captain Wagner, played by Wendell Pierce, who's a wonderful actor, and she seems to bond with Officer Kaya Blank, played by Cara Patterson. So I think inherently when you're a police observer, that brings a nice like push-pull of tension where she's smart, she's bringing a lot to the table, she's very much closer to solving this case and more quickly than they are, but also they don't want to be observed.
That is the interesting dynamic where she is smart, quirky, picks up on this case very quickly, even inserts herself into the investigation with some pushback. And we later see that Officer Blank is assigned to follow her to make sure Elsbeth doesn't get too involved in the detective's day-to-day work.
And she couldn't help but get charmed by Elsbeth because Elsbeth is fun. She's a great lead. She has these really fun clothes. She's quirky. She's odd. I loved the opening scene. I won't give it away, but it's very funny the way that she gets to the crime scene. And the things that she picks up on, such as like deodorant scent or teeth whitening strips or typing double spaces after your periods, help her figure out how to solve the crime. It was very interesting and fun to watch.
It is fun, and it feels different and familiar. I think we named a lot. While we were discussing, we named a lot of procedurals this reminds us of. Particularly with CBS, this feels like the police procedural version of Good Doctor.
Absolutely.
It's a great formula, so I see why they would give that a shot.
This also feels like a classic procedural, like Lifetime TV movie, Columbo, even more recently like a Monk, which I know we always like to mention, where we know who did it. Our lead, our protagonist knows who did it. They want to arrest that person ASAP, but they don't have the power. They have to find the evidence. They have to convince the police. And so it's more a game of cat and mouse. One of my favorite iterations of this is where Monk figures out how an astronaut murdered someone while the astronaut was in space or about to be launched or something. It's very clever. And I'm not giving it away because we knew from the beginning that the astronaut did it, but we didn't quite know how. And when Monk figures it out, it's so satisfying. And so I think that they were going for that kind of vibe with this. And they had these little back and forths where the main villain practically confesses to her. He's like, girl, I feel sorry for you. I know we're going back and forth. This is fun for me. And it just made me feel like classic TV is back. And I learned that there's going to be like a fun guest murderer of the week, like a guest star comes in and does this back and forth with her every week.
Oh, that's a cool gimmick.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this didn't hit as hard for me. I think because I have not seen this style of mystery procedural in a while. The case itself didn't feel exciting enough. It's wealthy girl murdered by the man she's seeing. And I'm very used to going into this show where I need to solve the mystery with our lead. And so this really threw me off for a bit, but I see the appeal.
You can see the vision.
It's there. Yeah. You've convinced me.
Okay, so will you watch more episodes of Elsbeth on CBS?
I'm adding this to my lunchtime rotation.
Okay.
Would watch again while cooking. I think this is another solid procedural. And now that I have the frame of mind that it's not about solving the mystery, but how you catch the criminal, I think I would enjoy it more when I keep watching. How do you feel?
I think I would watch again casually and or save up a few episodes for like a cozy afternoon, like watching a few on a Saturday, Sunday afternoon, because it's very fun. Our lead is very charming and engaging. And I think if you're a procedural person, if you enjoy these kinds of shows with the quirky person who somewhat extrajudicially solves crime, then you'll enjoy this as well, and probably in a similar way. All right, Beej. Well, why don't you take us from crime fighting to crime doing?
You're talking about the completely made-up adventures of Dick Turpin on Apple TV+. A reluctant leader of a gang of rogues, Dick Turpin, played by Noel Fielding, sets out on a series of wild adventures, all while trying to outwit the corrupt lawman and thief-taker, played by Hugh Bonneville. So, Mitu, what did you think of this pilot episode that introduced us to Dick Turpin?
I thought this was a funny story within a story. He's being very silly and quirky. He is on his way to being executed. And so he's telling the people, gather round. This is what led me to this point. And so we have the story within the story leading up to this moment. And we have an interesting angle with a writer named Eliza, played by Dolly Wells, who is a true crime writer, somewhat reluctantly, who's going to follow him around and try to capture his story as well. And so I thought it was silly.
I think that's a good description. It's silly. It's a very weird, absurd type of surreal world. And I thought they used the flashbacks well. As you said, he's about to go get hanged with other criminals at the top of the episode. And now he's telling his story to everyone else who's about to die. But I felt like it was a good way of incorporating how he didn't fit in as a butcher. And he stumbled literally into a life of crime by just sitting at a bar run by a child.
It was funny to see him adopt a gang.
And they like him. They're like a little family now.
It really didn't take long. He just wasn't mean to them.
That's all it took. And he didn't even want to hang out with them.
True. And I will say about the group dynamics, my main critique of the show is it's only silly. There's not really depth, which is fine. Mm-hmm. You can have comedies where you don't, let's say, fall in love with the characters or care about their relationships with each other. It's just fun to watch these people be silly and josh around with each other. But in this case, if you're going for that where there isn't quite that depth, it should have been funnier. I should be laughing every minute. And for me, I think my biggest laugh is when he opens that door thinking it's a passage and it's the cupboard. That's basically it.
I can see what you're saying. It does go full on silly, trying to land jokes, and there's no heart or take home message. I think you could really try and ring out the message of do what you love in life and you'll find your way. Something to that degree.
You can be the vegan son of a butcher.
And you can wear a dress if that's more comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Because if you don't love yourself, how in the hell are you going to love somebody else? Can I get an amen?
There you go. But 9-year-olds will still have to run bars. I'm not changing that up.
But I also think it didn't need the heart. Like, it doesn't need heart.
True.
It
doesn't.
can just be so funny.
It needs to be funnier.
I think it just needs to be a lot sharper. I think about, this is a totally different kind of comedy, so I fully respect that this is apples and oranges. I think about a Veep where I don't necessarily fall in love with the characters. I don't necessarily care about their dynamics with each other. It's just so funny. There's just a joke every 30 seconds. So you're cracking up. And there is never a moment at the end of Veep where you're like, and that's why you should be honest to the American people. Like, it's just funny. And so I just would expect more humor from a show like this if they're not doing the have heart and, you know, land some kind of message approach to comedy.
Okay, so it seems like they may have missed the mark on some of your expectations, but will that keep you from watching more episodes?
I think this one is not for me. It just should have been a little bit more funny, a little bit more outlandish. And I think based on this pilot, I'm not sure I want to watch more episodes. But if you're looking for a silly, very bright and frothy show, I think you might enjoy this. I'm also not a period piece person. And so perhaps also Period Piece Hive if you're looking for a comedy, though not remotely historically accurate. I say period piece very loosely. People are just...
It's inspired by.
In some smocks and frocks and things, but that's it. But you might like it.
I would rate this higher at would watch while folding laundry. I think there's a lot of promise for these wild adventures that Dick will go on with his gang. And I can see the potential for that leading to some really funny moment in the future.
All right. So let's take things from one epic adventure to another.
You're talking about Shogun on FX. Based on James Clavell's best-selling novel, this story is set in Japan in the year 1600 at the dawn of a century-defining civil war. Lord Yoshi Taranaga, played by Hiroyuki Sanada, is fighting for his life as his enemies on the Council of Regents unite against him when a mysterious European ship is marooned in a nearby fishing village. So, Mitu, what did you think of this epic story?
It was a lot of story, a lot of very epic story. They were balancing internal political drama within these different warlord communities, like within the communities intra, and then inter between the different warlord communities. Warlord community is probably the wrong word, but just whatever those groups of people are, led by these 5 warlords. And then you put on top of that the mistrust between the Japanese and the invaders. So the Portuguese, whom they've chosen essentially as the enemy that they'll trust the most for trade and things. This British man now that has come in on this ship where they're like, where are you coming from? So this also European hunt to find Japan. So I thought that was very interesting. With that, though, there was just a lot going on.
I agree. We were introduced to a big political battle where the heir to the throne is not old enough yet. So we see people fighting for power and people suspecting others of taking on too much land and power. And then we're introduced to John Blackthorne, played by Cosmo Jarvis, who is just coming to get some trade and goods and probably take over Japan, but also just see what they have because the Portuguese were there. And now there's this other conflict of how are we going to deal with this prisoner who may have some value to them, maybe not. And then there was also a baby involved. And then there is the heir who's also there being schooled and trained, but is not safe. It's a lot. But interesting. I
Very
liked it.
interesting. I was confused a lot. However, at each juncture, so each time I watched a council meeting, the trade negotiations and discussions with the Portuguese, watching Blackthorn interact with the Europeans, watching him interact with the Japanese, each moment, let's say, each scene to scene, I was sucked in. But if you polled me after and you were like, all right, tell me exactly what's going on with this faction of warlords, I don't know that I could be very honest in trying to repeat it back to you.
I agree. It's hard to recount the story, even now, to you, listener. But all the scenes were so gripping. There are some very violent ones, but you really see what these Japanese armies are willing to do when they feel threatened or when they want to exert their power. I thought it was also interesting to see Blackthorn learn more about the Japanese culture. By the end of the episode, he really sees it in a different light than he did when he was just sailing in to visit.
That's true. He did continually call them savages to their face, so very excited for whenever sort of the Google Translate of it all kicks in and they understand what he's calling them to their faces. But to your point, it was a really epic and brutal look into this time.
Yes, and you brought up the ship scenes. Those were like a huge scale, which you wouldn't expect for TV.
Gorgeous. Gorgeous to watch. Very scary. Very gripping. The ocean, a very scary place. These giant waves. And so watching them navigate that was tough. But I couldn't look away.
It's interesting because they comment that the Japanese sailors prefer to stay close enough that they can see the coast, but that might not always be the safest route.
Yeah. And I know we already mentioned this, but I just have to reiterate, it is so violent.
It is. They do not steer away from blood and torture and bodily fluids. And there's a hint of nudity. They throw rotten fish on someone.
There were multiple scenes I had to fast forward. And usually I really try to be a trooper, but I was like, absolutely not am I going to watch someone's skin and flesh melt away from their body. I was like, BJ can fill me in if there's some really big secret or reveal that happens during this scene.
And to add to that, it is so intense that within the world of the show, people are commenting like, whoa, we really took it far with these captives. So they also see how violent it is.
That's true. There were many moments of acknowledgement. Like, uh-oh, should we have done that? Should we have peed on their faces?
I say, oh, that was rough.
So, do you want to keep watching this violent, epic, sometimes fluid-filled and emptied show?
I don't love that description, but I would watch again casually. I think the epic scale really sucks me into the world. And even though I'm not quite sure what's happening, I know some serious stuff is happening. And I think that is enough to keep me going. And maybe I'll pick up on the actual storyline by like episode 2 or 3.
I think this one was really good. I agree that it was confusing, a lot going on, but each scene was so gripping. And I'm not even really a period piece person, as I just shared with Dick Turpin. But I think this one is worth giving a couple more episodes. And if I'm able to grasp the story, I'm going to keep going.
Nice. So can you remind me of your question from the top of the episode?
Oh, which properties have you inherited?
Oh, none. I'd like to think I'll inherit all of your property and all of your things because I will most likely outlive you, and so it'll be like a nice gift from you. So, if you want to find more episodes of the Pilot Podcast, head to our website at thepilotpodcast.com, and you can follow us on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Me Too is really side-eyeing me right now, you guys, but she's going to tell you where you can find us on social media.
I really look forward to Spite outliving you. Like, just...
Good luck.
We'll both be so tired. We'll both be so tired of it. And yet...
I'm going to be a robot. I'll keep going.
I'll power forward like the Duracell bunny.
You and me both. To the end of the universe. We'll both just be staring each other down.
Just going and going. All because of some couple condos between us, probably, that would be up for grabs. But that's fine. You can find us on social media at The Pilot Pod on Instagram, X, and TikTok. And you can send thoughts, feelings, show recommendations, life-extending suggestions specifically addressed to me to askthepilotpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.
Bye.